Hey everybody, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Beekeeping for Newbies. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen. I most certainly do appreciate you. And as always, feel free to reach out, Jeff at beekeepingfornewbies.com. That's NEWBEES.com. Well, folks, today we are going to have a fun and exciting discussion about a topic that has a huge draw to it and a huge amount of activity in the spring. It's just something that people get really amped up and excited about. And quite frankly, there are people in the beekeeping space who are almost specialists in dealing with and doing this. Well, technically there are specialists around a portion of it, but there are people who are like, I don't really care much about the day-to-day beekeeping things or whatever, but man, I love being involved in this. And what we're talking about today is swarm traps. Now, if you don't have any idea what that means, you're in the right place, because today we're going to be talking about what they are, why they are relevant within, potentially within your apiary and within your beekeeping strategy. We're going to talk about how they work, some of the pros and cons associated with them, and we'll just go through kind of everything on my mind. Now, inevitably what happens is I can put together all the great notes of things I want to make sure that I cover because it's important. And then as soon as I press the stop button on the record at the end of the day, I go, oh, crap, I forgot about this or that. So if you'd like, you can jump into the Discord room, and links to that are all over the place. They are on the Beekeeping for Newbies homepage. It's in the description of this podcast. It's also on YouTube. Everywhere we are. Oh, by the way, youtube.com/@Beekeeping for Newbies. But yeah, everywhere has links to Discord if you want to join us over there. And if you'd like to buy me a coffee, I won't turn that down either. So before we define the swarm trap and go into that, I want to talk a little bit about the swarm by itself, because I think it's an important topic, and it's one of those things where in the beekeeping space, you're going to be discussing swarms from the very beginning of your bee journey through the rest of your life. You're always going to be talking about swarming because it plays such a critical and crucial role in beekeeping and in the survival of honeybees. Swarming is just that. It is the honeybee's natural way of reproducing. So in the spring, when there is a tremendous amount of abundance and plenty of resources coming into the hive, it's during this time when they have tons of resources available that they are able to divide the colony and create a new colony. So what happens is the existing colony will make new swarm cells or queen cells, and the primary, or the existing, I should say, queen, she will leave with roughly about 50% of the colony. They will go with her to a new location. Now, this is where the swarm trap comes into play, because by default, they will leave and they'll go try to find a convenient place in a tree somewhere, or just anywhere where they can form their cluster and begin the process of figuring out where they want to find their new forever home. So if you've seen any of those kind of textbook images of a swarm, you're looking at kind of a cone shape, like an inverted triangle of just a big group of bees hanging out. And what they'll do is they will send out scout bees. Now, quite often, in advance of actually swarming, some bees will start kind of pre-scouting some things out, which is going to come up again later and be a little bit important. But as they are in this cluster and they are on a tree branch or wherever they might be hanging, these scout bees are going out and they're looking for a new home. Now, as we get into the discussion a little bit today, we'll talk about some of the specifics of what they're looking for, but this is what you are trying to capitalize on. You want to find a way to say, I know you're going to leave naturally, like there is a natural tendency for you to swarm. I know some bees somewhere near me are going to try to do it, and I would like to get some free bees, because what ends up happening is you can get swarms that are probably, significantly larger than a package of bees. Now, a package of bees that are typically sold, they're a 3-pound package with a queen, and you're paying somewhere between, maybe if you're lucky, as low as $125, maybe as much as $200 for a package of bees, and then you get to pay for shipping on top of that. The pricing on everything is through the roof, and bees are no different. I would just basically assume that if you can catch a swarm, you just saved yourself about $200. So if I didn't have your attention before, hopefully I've got it now. Now, before we dive into some of the specifics of the swarm trap itself and what you need to do to make one or get one deployed, I do want to talk about just kind of a couple of quick pros and cons. So, of course, I just mentioned the one being free bees. Everybody loves free bees. But another thing I want you to think about, too, is some genetic diversity. So you have an apiary. Now, again, you might be a first-year beekeeper, so all of your genetics are new. But if you've been keeping bees for a couple of years and you're starting to say, okay, I like these traits, so I'm going to try to breed for these specific traits within my apiary. I'm going to get rid of these other queens that aren't productive. Then you get to a point over time where there are just different things you want to bring in. There was a time where I had a couple hundred colonies, and what I was doing was occasionally ordering some packages or ordering some queens from other places just to bring in different genetics. So having the ability to do that for free can be a good thing. There's a kind of an asterisk to it. It can be a good thing. It can be problematic depending on what you're bringing in. But another good thing to remember is one of the key traits that I always look for in a honeybee colony, particularly of my queen, is the ability to overwinter. If the colony can't overwinter, their longevity within my apiary really doesn't exist, because that's sort of like a key thing that that's what you live for as a bee, is kind of like being able to overwinter so you can do it again next year. If they can't do that, they don't have much value in my apiary. Well, you have a pretty good probability that if you're getting a swarm, especially earlier in the season like we are in right now, that is probably from a colony that survived overwinter already. So you've got this queen who just overwintered, shows up at your house and says, hi, I'd like to live with you now. So that's a really great opportunity for you to get some good local genetics. Now, there are a couple of cons to this. One, you could be bringing some potential disease. Now, if the bees were in the wild and they were managing Varroa on their own, you say, well, Jeff, how does that happen? They don't have any treatments. There are some very interesting things and some research coming out right now that's kind of pointing to the idea that when bees are overwintering in a natural cavity, that the carbon dioxide levels can get to a level that is so low, actually. Well, the oxygen level being lower, the carbon dioxide being higher, that the Varroa mites can't actually survive in those conditions. Now, I think the research is still relatively new, and I would love to dive into that more and get some more information. So when I do have it available, I will absolutely report back to you on that. But I always wondered, like, how do, non-managed honeybees take care of themselves as it relates to Varroa? And this is potentially something that is being looked at. But you don't know what kind of disease is coming with them. I mean, what if they are coming from a hive that, whether it was managed or unmanaged, that had some kind of disease, particularly like American foul brood, and they're going to bring this into your apiary? That's really not great. Temperament is a big deal too, especially depending on where you are geographically. Just because you caught a swarm somewhere doesn't mean that that swarm is going to be a kind, gentle, and loving honeybee. And there's a lot of areas in the southern parts of the U.S. where you really have to be aware of the potential for them to be Africanized. So you definitely have to pay attention to what you're doing. Now, the standard rule, or the guidance that everybody always gives, is you don't have to worry. When a colony swarms, they're not defending the colony anymore. They're not defending a hive, and they're much more gentle. So, look right here. See, I'm putting my hand on it, and I'm just moving them around, and they're not upset with me. That is pretty well true in about 90% of cases. And then there are some other cases where you get near them and they do, for whatever reason, get a bit aggressive. I have been stung with minimal gear on. I had a veil on and that was it, trying to recover a swarm on a tree. And they stung me several times, which kind of surprised me. But they will still fight back if they feel their life is being threatened. And if they are Africanized, or if they do just have kind of a nasty temperament, they will let you know. So please, please, whenever you're dealing with catching swarms, swarm traps, anything, make sure that you're using all of your protective gear. I know you don't want to be hot and sweaty, and I completely get that. But the good news, too, is a lot of swarm trapping is taking place early in the season before it gets stinking hot in the middle of the summertime. So hopefully that will encourage you to keep your gear on. All right, now what is the swarm trap? I think there's two ways you can kind of go with this. There is sort of the biological, what do honeybees look for? And the what do you got kind of approach. Research has kind of indicated that honeybees like to have a cavity that is about 40 liters in total space. So this equates to about 1 deep. Now, when I say 1 deep, for anyone who might be new, we're talking about a Langstroth 10-frame hive setup, and that is roughly about 40 liters. So the instinct might be, well, okay, cool, I've got plenty of those. I'll just put that in the tree. Now you can definitely do that. But the swarm trap kind of has evolved to be a more slender, low profile, kind of hanging from a tree friendly approach. So we'll talk about the specifics of hanging them in just a minute, but the one thing that is important is trying to get something that is roughly the size of that container. Because that's, again, what the bees are going to be looking for, is that roughly 40 liters. They're not too particular about all of the dimensions of it. Now, what's interesting, too, is, people will tell you, well, this is what they look for. This is what they want. Now, the reality is I have seen bees find homes in the oddest places. If you've ever watched any videos online, I think I've seen one where they swarmed to a suitcase and literally built a hive within a suitcase. They made the suitcase into a hive, and they did the same thing I've seen, underneath of grills or inside of grills. And, of course, anytime there's like an awning or there's some kind of an area where they can get into a house and get into a roof, rafters up in those cavities, they will make a home out of whatever is available. I've had hardware sitting outside where I thought, okay, I'm just going to put this off to the side because I need to move this one to a different location, and I want it to be all ready so when I come here next time I can just pick it up and leave. And then I come there 3 days later and they've swarmed to it, and it's just a regular hive on a stand sitting on the ground waiting for me to pick up, and I got a free beehive from it. So there are some things here that we're going to give as guidance for how you may or may not want to hang them and place them and all of that. But the reality is, again, honeybees are really adaptable. And when they need a home, any port in a storm, right? If they need a place and you've got something that's pretty close, sometimes close is good enough. All right, so we're going to talk about some of the construction of what that cavity looks like if you're going to build one. Now, what I'll do is, instead of getting into specific dimensions and things, you can go to the Beekeeping for Newbies homepage. There's a resources section in there, and you can download swarm trap plans. There's lots of other things you can download there. And you can also look on some other areas where we have some research that we're trying to conduct this year and see what we're going to be doing as far as our projects go. But there is a set of swarm trap plans there, and it shows you how to make 3 swarm traps from a single piece of wood. So feel free to download those from there. And of course, like I said, the link to that will be in the description of this podcast. So you'll be able to just click directly to there if you'd rather just go that route. Now, what I do with mine is I have built them from that plan, and I've done 2 different types of wood with this, and my recommendation of the 2, I used OSB. It's the oriented strand board. It's that stuff that you see a lot in construction being used for flooring and roofing sheathing and all of that. So OSB, and then the other kind of option is plywood. Now, at the time that I built some a few years ago, plywood was through the roof. It was so expensive. I just bought a couple pieces of OSB, and I think I got the size that was right around a half an inch. So I think it's going to be something like 15-30 seconds or something like that. I don't remember, 19-30 seconds. It was somewhere in that area. I would say you want to probably do it in that half inch, 5/8, maybe 3/4 of an inch area. Those are okay for the boxes themselves if you're going to make them. just kind of okay. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, I might give them like a 7 or something like that. But what is really important is if you're following those plans, there is a hanger piece that goes in the back of it that you secure to the swarm trap, and then it has a hole in the top that you use to kind of wrap it around the tree. That piece needs to be much more durable. I was pulling one off of a tree, and that OSB, after it was wet, it really just kind of ripped off and didn't do so well. I would really, really recommend plywood. I think that I've done both. I've used both. And number one, you got to paint them. That's a big deal, because like the plywood ones, you can kind of get away with it a little bit, and it'll last longer. Those OSB ones, if you don't paint those, they just fall apart so much faster. So make the choice of what's best for you. Again, you're getting 3 per piece of plywood. So that's a pretty good deal when you look at kind of dollar for dollar. I think the price comes out to be about $20 per. But follow the plans, pretty simple. That setup will give you a 5-frame swarm trap. And then as it relates to the entrance, you can follow the plans on the entrance where it has you drilling. I think it's 2 small holes that are kind of side by side. Then you stick a nail in between them to keep anything from going in. What I do is they have these spinning wheels, and I will add I'll add a link to those as well in the description of all of this. That way you can track down those parts if you'd like to. But with the spinning wheel, I just drill a single hole that's usually about a 7/8 of an inch, something like that. And I put the spinning wheel over top of that. So it has one completely wide open section. It has a section that is queen excluded. So if you said, well, look, I know they're in there and I've caught them, I don't want them to leave. So you switch over to kind of that queen excluded section, and that allows the workers to come in and out. Now your drones won't be able to get in and out, but as a temporary solution to make sure that queen doesn't leave, you could definitely go with that. There is another option that is closed, but has some ventilation. So you have a few things you can kind of spin the wheel. I just put a single screw in, and I screw it all the way until it kind of stops, and then back it out just a little bit. And there is a tab that's on the back of this wheel that provides a little bit of resistance. And that helps to allow you to, as you're spinning it, you can kind of lift it forward a little bit. You'll figure it out when you start messing with them. But the trick with those is it's only 5 frames wide in the top, but it's much deeper down below. This will come into play later on, and we'll discuss that a little bit more. Now, as far as the cover goes, I use just a migratory style cover, and it's the same one in the plans. And of course, the reason that I'm going with that is because it's flush up against the tree, so I don't want anything hanging over on all sides. There is also a YouTube video that I've done. I've done the full 10-minute build of this, where I'm actually taking all the parts that I've cut and I'm assembling them. I think I actually shot a crown staple into my thumb and was bleeding on the swarm trap. So if you're not looking for it, you might not notice the actual blood, but yeah, I got that on tape for you guys, or on video, so you can share in my misery. But there's also a 1-minute version if you just want to see the sped up version of that. It's all on the YouTube channel. You can check that good stuff out. The other thing you want to kind of keep in mind as you're building is some of the things you want to be thinking about for in the future. So as I go to put this wherever I want to put it, what's that method going to look like, so you can incorporate that into the build process. So the next piece of this is something that's going to be really important as you are preparing your swarm traps. Now, you're not going to do this yet, but you do want to have it ready. And this is what you're going to be using for bait. Now, the very natural way of doing this is just putting a frame of comb inside of the swarm trap. Because over time, bees occupy a space and maybe they die out for whatever reason, they abscond, they swarm, whatever happens. And for some reason, the bees that were once in this particular cavity are no longer there. But when you put a frame, and the frame, you know, if it's drawn comb, great, they can get started right away. If it just has, you know, just some evidence of honeybees, maybe some propolis around the sides, a little bit of wax foundation here and there, or if all you have is wax foundation, that's kind of a bee type of smell. But putting those things into the hive, that tells the bees, hey, somebody else was here before us and it worked for them. So, you know, maybe it'll work for us. I don't think that's the detailed logic that they go through, but you kind of know what I mean. They're looking for things that are familiar to them. In addition to that, we also like to add a type of lure. Now, there are a couple of different options out here. For years, I used a commercially available name brand, you know, swarm lure. I am unfortunately not even going to mention their name anymore because maybe I'm just being petty. Maybe I'm just a not nice person. I don't know. But when I first started buying this about 5 years ago or so, I was getting it for like $14 or $15 a container. I think it was last year I was doing some testing. So I went ahead and paid, I think it was like $35 for it. And I thought, man, that's really getting pricey. And then I saw it this year at like $42. And I thought, you know what? I'm not going to do that. That's getting abusive. If I'm wrong, then I'll apologize later, but I'm not real thrilled about that. So I'm just not going to mention it by name. So you can do research and find some commercial things that are available. There is someone who reached out to me in the comments of a YouTube video yesterday and said, hey, there's a particular brand that I use that I've had really good results with. I reached out to them yesterday and asked them to see if they'd be interested in providing a sample that we can use, and maybe we can show you guys what that looks like. Again, I've never used it, so I'm not going to mention it. But I will mention something specific that people have had a lot of good luck with over the years. Several members in our Discord room have mentioned it, and it is the go-to for beekeepers, I would at least say within the U.S., but probably worldwide, is lemongrass oil. And the reason that lemongrass oil seems to be a preferred type of bait or lure is because it most closely resembles the natural smell of the Nasenhof gland of the honeybees. When the honeybees kind of put their backside up, put their abdomen up in the air, and they start fanning, they're pushing that Nasenhof pheromone out. And that's sort of a signal like, hey, everybody, this is where you want to be. This is the place. Queen's over here. Come on in. And it helps to disperse pheromone. And that scent is very closely mimicked by the lemongrass oil. Now, I would caution you, and this is really important. One thing we all kind of like to do, or at least most of us guys are pretty bad about this. We always feel like more is better. Like you're gluing two things together and you're globbing big hunks of glue. It took me probably a couple of decades to realize that like less is better with glue, Type Bond 3, by the way. But when you're gluing your wood components together, you don't need to have wood or glue pouring out of every crevice and corner. You just need to cover the surface and let it do its thing. But don't go nuts with whatever lure that you're using. I have some theories on this. I'm not 100%, but I kind of overdid it, I think, a couple of years ago. And I think I attracted this swarm that came to the box, and they were excited about what was there. And then I've got this picture I can show somebody. If anybody's interested, just let us know in the Discord room, and I'll post the picture. They started building comb underneath of the box. I walked up to it and I thought, oh, I literally just caught a swarm right now while I'm here, today. This is great. I go up and I put my ladder against the tree and I look at it and I'm like, there's comb off the bottom of the box. They had about 6-7 inches of comb coming down from the middle, and it was about 8 or 9 inches wide. And they were working on their second row. And it must have been there for, for 4 or 5 days probably. But anyway, they were attracted to the smell, but it was overwhelming. It was too much. So I recommend use less. And I'm talking about, for the lemongrass oil, just put a couple of drops, put, one or maybe one down by the entrance, put 1 or 2 up under the lid, maybe 1 down in the corner. You're probably looking at maybe 3 or 4 drops total. Don't go crazy with it. And then refresh that, depending on who you talk to. I think if you're refreshing the lemongrass oil maybe once a week, every 10 days, you might be able to push it out to 2 weeks. But just try to refresh it periodically to keep that scent alive. And you'll actually see, bees that are out and about and they're foraging and they're doing their daily routine. You'll see them drop by and say, hey, what do you got going on over here? But those are definitely good things to consider, using some kind of a bait to help bring them in. Again, having drawn comb or any kind of a comb that has that scent helps tremendously, but you just want to stack the odds in your favor. Now, do be mindful that unattended drawn comb will, it will bring the wax moth in a little bit, but wax moth isn't a huge problem usually in the spring, like early on. I don't have a lot of problems with them, in that March, April timeframe. So, periodically check things out, pull your lid off, look inside, and just make sure that you don't see anything in there that shouldn't be there, and then close it back up. Okay, so now we're going to get into where you hang these. Now, again, we talked before kind of briefly about how bees will swarm to kind of whatever's available. If they're in a pinch, if they're in a bind, they're going to take whatever's available. Now, I'm going to give you kind of an interesting example here at my house. I have 2 swarm traps hanging up right now that I'm going to get those all completely done today. I may record some of that if there's anything that might be useful. It's just me checking them out. I'm going to pull a few frames out of them, make sure the frames are good, take the hive tool, clean everything out, make sure nothing weird is living in there, and I'll get them baited. And yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll make a video of that today. It won't take long and it'll be kind of fun. But I've got 2 swarm traps hanging up at my house in my front yard. I also have 2 of the pill bottle swarm traps. If you haven't seen that, again, I'll include links to that in the description. It's on our YouTube channel. But I had seen this years ago where somebody hung a pill bottle from a branch and baited it. And I was like, that's silly. And then they caught swarms. And I thought, well, that probably works for some people. There's no way that's going to actually work for a broader audience. And then I saw a lot of people actually pulling this off. So I put it up too late last year. Last year I didn't get it up really in time for my swarm season, but there's a cool video on that I show you how to make them on our YouTube page. But I got those up. One of them is up right now. I'll bait that today. I'll include that in the video, and I'm going to hang another one. The way I've rigged this one up is I'm using 550 paracord, and I bait it, and then I pull the paracord down towards me, of course, so it's over a branch. So it raises it up into the air about 12, 15 feet. And then I just tie the paracord off to the tree, and that way it gets the swarm up a little bit higher. When it's time to actually catch the swarm, you just put your box, down below and untie, lower it down. And I've hooked swivel snaps with leader material onto the pill bottles. That way I can just pop the swivel off and literally walk around with a swarm on the end of a leader hooked to a pill bottle. I'm going to have 4 total traps in the front yard. But now what's interesting is the point that I wanted to kind of go over with you is I hang mine at about, that 6 to 10 foot range, somewhere in there. But this is seriously really, really important, guys. Don't fight to try to get them like 30 feet up in the air. Now, I will tell you, last year I had my traps up. I watched a swarm go through the air. Like I looked above, I heard them going by, and they swarmed to another tree in my yard that has a cavity in it, and they set up a home there. But I was convinced they were coming to one of my swarm traps. They were scouting one of them really, really heavily, and a couple of them were at the other one, and I actually had a camera. I was going to live stream the swarm. I will probably put the camera back up again here in the next week or two so we can hopefully catch a live swarm for you and live stream that. But they were up in this tree probably 30, 35 feet in the air, and they chose that location over all 4 of my swarm traps. Now, again, the pill bottles, that's drawing them based on the scent. Obviously, it doesn't meet any of the real criteria for what they really would like to look for. But I try to target something in that like 10 to 12 foot range if it's possible. But here's the thing I wanted to get at as far as being the most important thing. Please, please, please don't put yourself in an unsafe situation just to get your swarm trap up another foot or 2. Like, to me, I think it would be really, really neat. Back in my old hunting days when I was younger, I had a climbing tree stand. And I thought it'd be, man, how cool would it be to hook a rope up to my swarm trap, just like if you're pulling up your rifle, and climb all the way to the top, and then grab the rope, pull the swarm trap up, hang it up, 20, 25, 30 feet in the air, and catch a swarm up there. Yes, you can probably do that. But then there's that other thing you got to remember, because at some point in time, you're going to have to retrieve that. So that means you're going to go up there, close it, lower the swarm trap to the ground. Hopefully you have an assistant who can keep it from hitting the ground and falling over. Then you've got to come back down and then go and relocate them. And ideally, maybe a lot of that might be happening in the dark, or you get to where you close the entrance off. So you're doing it at a time where you're not disturbing them as much. There's just a lot of things that can go wrong. If you can get them 5 feet off the ground, put it 5 feet off the ground. If you can lean a small ladder or a step ladder in the area and have somebody foot that ladder, and I'm serious about that, guys, because I remember like the old days, like as a paramedic, man, just watching people fall, like just falls, particularly when you get to that age like where I am now. I mean, you hit that anywhere between like 45 to 55 where you still kind of think you're young and can do everything, but your body hasn't completely told you the truth yet. And then you're falling off of roofs and doing stupid things. Like, it's a dangerous age to be at because you still think you can do everything and you want to cling to the youth and try to be everything all the time. It just doesn't work. Don't put your safety in jeopardy just to hang a swarm trap. Oh, and one more thing, I did want to mention this in more detail earlier, so I'm kind of going back to this. I mentioned at the beginning that you can actually use a deep high body if you like. You don't have to use this particular type of swarm trap. This is just something that a lot of people have decided is a good style for them, and it works well, and it provides some expansion space. But if you wanted to use a regular deep hive body, my recommendation in order to do this in a way that provides adequate support would be to just create essentially like a 90-degree angle. So provide a piece of wood that, I would say maybe like a piece of 2x6 material. Now, if you're going to drill into your tree and screw something into your tree, that's kind of up to you. I wouldn't do that with a tree that you actually like and care about. If you can just maybe use a ratchet strap to hold it temporarily, that might work a little bit better so you don't damage the tree long term. That's certainly up to you as to how you handle that. But if you can make a vertical section that goes, parallel to the up and down tree itself, and then have a piece coming off of that would then be perpendicular. So now you're getting that 90 degree. A nice, like I said, 2x6, maybe even a 2x8. You could get away with 1x material as long as it was adequately supported. But what you're going to end up doing then is cutting a piece that you will essentially miter two ends of it at 45 degrees to give you a support post. So it's basically three pieces of wood. You have the vertical piece on the tree, the perpendicular piece coming off of the tree, and then a piece that is at a 45-degree angle, providing support to the base that you've just built. Now, on top of that, you can then set your deep hive body, and then from there you can secure it to the tree as well as the base itself. So this is something that a lot of people will do. And again, you don't want these things to be crazy high up in the air. You're going to have to lift it up and move it later. If it's 5 or 6 feet versus 8 or 10 feet, I'm sure it's going to be okay. If you miss that swarm because it was 2 feet too low, I would rather miss the swarm and be safe. You'll see in the video that I do later on, it's just, again, mine are 8 or 10 feet off the ground. I have a ladder that stays permanently at my apiary that leans perfectly into this one tree. And what I've done with it too, just as an extra safety measure, because I was operating alone, kind of in the middle of nowhere, is I just took a ratchet strap and I put it around the top of the ladder and just kind of hooked it loosely on so that as I raise the ladder up against the tree, it's kind of hanging there. And then I wrapped a second one that I hooked around the tree and pulled the ladder towards the tree. I didn't ratchet it down really tightly, just enough to keep it from coming off the tree. Then when I climbed up to where the swarm trap goes, I then reached around and ratcheted the top to the tree. So even though I didn't have somebody there to foot the ladder, I had it secured as best I could to the tree so that I don't end up being on the ground doing the kicking chicken. I don't want to do that. Okay, everyone. Well, I talked a lot longer than I thought I was going to today, so I've gone ahead and broken this up into 2 episodes. If you are listening to this episode the day of the release, the next one will be out tomorrow. If you waited a couple days, you can listen to them back to back. So that's all I've got for you today in part 1. Take care, be kind to one another, and remember that I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. We'll talk to you soon.